Coming to you from the mountains and the plain. The only conservative voices brave enough to push back. This is the Conservative Daily Podcast with Joe Otto.
That's what the Second Amendment was designed to do. If you're going to do something to nullify or take away my rights under the Constitution, come get it.
Max McGuire.
When you look at politicians on the left, they need to convince people that they are victims.
A resistance to the resistance. And now your hosts, Joe Otto and Max McGuire.
And welcome back to another edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. My name is Max McGuire. Back in studio with us today is Mr. Joe Otto. Joe, how's it going?
It's going good. I'm going golfing today. And I was golfing yesterday. Yeah? Sorry I missed it.
Well, you were missed. We went through the Supreme Court. It's not like anything really big and important happened over the weekend. So luckily you were absent on a slow news day. It's not like there was a Supreme Court. But we got through it. We have good news to start with today because Republicans have announced that they have the votes to confirm a Supreme Court justice before the election. Mr. Producer, let's go ahead and play cut 2.
We're going to have a process that you'll be proud of. The nominee is going to be supported by every Republican in the Judiciary Committee, and we've got the votes to confirm the justice on the floor of the Senate before the election, and that's what's coming.
So that was Lindsey Graham last night, announcing that they say they have the votes. Now listen,
let's go.
This is obviously this is early. They said they had the votes for Kavanaugh. Democrats were able to drag out Blasey Ford, claiming he was a rapist, and all of a sudden that threw a whole wrench in it. And you had Republicans who said they would vote, all of a sudden decide they wanted more time. So there's still time. Never underestimate the GOP's ability to stab conservatives in the back. But the good news is at least we're going into this with apparently the votes.
Yeah, we're going into it with the votes, but I just think it's amazing that the Democrats literally are the biggest hypocrites out there, right? I mean, it wasn't that long ago that Ginsburg herself actually said that, hey, if it comes up, you have an obligation to actually confirm someone for the Supreme Court. And now on her deathbed, she used the word installed rather than elected, which isn't really like Judge Ginsburg. It's not like her. She's very precise in what I don't know if you've ever seen her speak, but she's very
she's very slow
and very concise.
Extra words.
She would never use the word installed. She wouldn't use that word.
And she also, if you read it, we talked about it yesterday, that the alleged statement said a new president is installed, which if Donald Trump wins re-election, he will not be a new president. He'll just be elected to his second term. Same president, second term. So the addition of new president, it seems like it's not just waiting for the inauguration. She wants Trump to lose, which obviously that's what she was doing. She tried to hang along as long as possible. But obviously she didn't make it. She had cancer. We've suspected that for months, that it had metastasized. And now it looks like the GOP has the vote. So everyone, I want you to hit the share button in celebration of the GOP announcing they had the votes. I want you to like the video on Facebook, leave a comment. And on YouTube, make sure you give us a thumbs up. And make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. So I want to show the statement from Mitt Romney today because leftists are freaking out. We're going to get into this crazy ruling in Wisconsin. If you listened to the podcast last week on the Pennsylvania ruling, this is even worse. So we're going to go through that in depth. But before, I want to cover Mitt Romney's ruling. So go ahead, Mr. Producer, and put up image A. This is Mitt Romney's statement. He says, "My decision regarding a Supreme Court nomination is not the result of a subjective test of fairness, which, like beauty, is in the eyes of the beholder. It is based on the immutable fairness of following the law, which in this case is the Constitution and precedent. The historical precedent of election year nominations is that the Senate generally does not confirm an opposing party's nominee, but does confirm a nominee of its own. The Constitution gives the President the power to nominate and the Senate the authority to provide advice and consent on the Supreme Court nominees. Accordingly, I intend to follow the Constitution and precedent in considering the President's nominee. If the nominee reaches the Senate floor, I intend to vote based upon their qualifications." That was a statement, and I want to go ahead and, Mr. Producer, let's put up my screen. We did this yesterday. It was very, very fun. Go ahead and put up my screen, Mr. Producer. Leftist Twitter is freaking out. And I think I want to do this more on the podcast, going on breaking news stories, see what leftist Twitter is talking about. Elijah Wood, actor, says, "Hey, Mitt Romney, stand for what is right for our country, not what is right for your party." Chip Franklin, "Can we get over the idea that moderate Republicans are ever going to do the right thing? Mitt Romney has shown everyone that there aren't any of them in Congress."
How about if there's any moderate liberals? Just a just moderate liberal. Just give me one. Just give me someone.
Cat Turd, that's his Twitter handle. Mitt Romney will tell you how he's going to vote as soon as Nancy tells him what to do. Oh, man, it's just really funny stuff. People calling for people to overload his phones. Damani Felder says, Mitt Romney said he'd support a floor vote on the next Supreme Court pick. Does that make Mitt cool again? Nope. I agree. It doesn't make Mitt Romney cool again.
No, not at all.
But we, at least for the moment, you can go ahead and take that off the screen, Mr. Producer. At least for the moment, we can put away the pitchforks. We still have to hold them accountable because, as I said, with Kavanaugh, the left threw that rapist charge in and derailed the whole thing. You had Jeff Flake and you had other Republicans say, whoa, we need to wait longer. We can't afford to wait longer, so we still need to stay on this. But it looks for the moment we can put away the pitchforks and celebrate that at least preliminarily the GOP looks like they have the votes. So let's dive right into this, Joe. The Wisconsin ruling.
They're just going state to state. I mean, the thing is they're going to run state to state, and they're going to try and cheat during this election. I mean, this is all this tells you, right? Is that we're dealing with a bunch of cheaters.
Yeah, it's I want to go ahead and put up an image. Which image should I label it as? Put up image B, Mr. Producer. This is William N. Conley. He is an Obama-appointed judge, U.S. district judge, who covers Wisconsin. I forget what circuit that is, but he's the, I think, Western Wisconsin, the U.S. District Court for Western Wisconsin, if I remember correctly. But that is his name, William Conley. He just issued a ruling stating that Wisconsin's long-held statutes dealing with election deadlines and such must be changed to comply with the realities of the pandemic. You can go ahead and take that off the screen, Mr. Producer. And if his name, if that picture or the name sounds familiar, real quick, Mr. Producer, put up my screen. This is the same judge who just a couple years ago ruled that Medicaid must cover gender reassignment surgery. So this guy is an activist. He is using his position to force things through that have no basis in law whatsoever.
So the problem is that no one ever takes enough time to challenge the legislative authority that's being taken in the judicial branch. And that's really what we're talking about, is that they're legislating through the judicial branch, which is, if anyone that ever went to school and learned about civics, learned about the Constitution, learned about the separation of powers, they're basically trying to take those powers. And no one's actually challenging it. It's like that slippery slope has happened in our government. You know, look, I'm not a fan of executive orders either, right? But over the years, executive orders have just elongated. And what has happened is that we've created the ability to bypass the legislative process in order for even the president to, get things done. And it's a dangerous precedent when all three of these mesh together their responsibilities. But
so there tend to be two different kinds of executive orders, at least in my mind. There are executive orders where you can trace the power back to statute. So there's plenty of opportunities that Congress, and over the years Congress has done this. They've basically ceded some of their authority over to the president. And they do this a lot when it comes to war, the declaration of war. Congress still has to declare war, but the War Powers Act gives the president the ability to attack a country without getting Congress's approval first, right? Immigration law allows the president to shut down the border without necessarily getting Congress's approval first. So they have ceded authorities over the years to the president to make sure that he can swiftly act when necessary. That's one part of executive orders. The other side, though, is when presidents, like we saw with Obama, decide to try and rewrite regulations or rewrite statutes to give them powers that were not necessarily conferred to them by Congress.
Expansive powers. So like when powers to expand certain parts or duties of the government, right? And we saw that especially during the Obama administration. But it was also done during the Bush administration.
It was, but not to the extent that we saw under Obama. For example, Congress has stated that if you're in the country illegally, you cannot work here. That's law. Obama went around that and started giving work permits to people in the country illegally, stating that he had the authority to do it because it was the morally right thing to do because they were brought here as children or teenagers. He violated the law, and he violated the clear intention of Congress. So those are the two types of executive orders. And I agree with you that the judicial branch has become more activist over the years. And as I mentioned on the podcast yesterday, it is no surprise that Congress is taking longer and longer these days to confirm a nominee because they know that those nominees will be legislating from the bench. In the 1700s, late 1700s, early 1800s, nominees didn't even always show up for their confirmation hearings.
Right.
They actually had hearings a lot of times in absentia, and it was mostly just a rubber stamp. And that was just when they were calling balls and strikes. Now that they're actually legislating from the bench and they're rewriting laws, and both parties know it, there's a much bigger. It's much more important to make sure that the person being put onto the bench, whether it be in the district, appeals, or Supreme Court, that they at least have a good head on their shoulders.
So let's back up for a minute. Just if we could just talk about this for a second, Max. My issue is not in that in creating some safe haven so that people can actually vote. I don't know how I feel about that. It's changing the rules and laws of the election, right? That creates concrete sidewalks that when you turn around, they're dry. So we're talking about this today, but over the next 4, 8, 12 years, I think that it's going to become more problematic as the cheating becomes more sophisticated, as the things that they do in order to steal elections becomes more evident. I mean, we're in the fight of our lives right now. If you don't think that the U.S. the country, the United States, and the Constitution is under attack, I mean, President Trump. I don't know if you saw. Other people did it too, but President Trump actually posted Biden butchering the pledge.
Yeah.
Did you guys see that?
Yeah, I got it wrong.
Did you play it yesterday?
No, but we posted it on our page. He got it wrong. It was one of those kinds of moments where he says it's like, it's the thing. We'll play it towards the end and give Mr. Producer a chance to download it. It's very easy to find, Mr. Producer. Just download it. Just search Joe Biden Butcher's Pledge of Allegiance. We'll give you a chance to find it. But before we do, I want to dive in.
He ends it with, for real.
For real, yeah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag, under God, indivisible, for real.
For real. Very funny, Mr. Producer.
You gotta be kidding me. Like, come on,
I'm sure you can find it.
Let's not wait. We gotta put that up. Come on. Okay.
Here, you got it, Mr. Producer? I can message it to you. I
for real.
on
Can you
Facebook.
message it to him for real?
So
and
while he's doing
mask,
that,
he was wearing the mask backwards.
backwards.
He had the mask inside out.
He also, over the weekend, we talked about this yesterday, and I was worried that might have been why you weren't on the show. Joe Biden said that by the time he ended his speech, 200 million Americans were going to be dead from COVID. And when I showed up, you were missing. Josh was still there. I was worried that I was going to be alone because the pure statistics would say that if Joe Biden was Nostradamus, he was correct. I would be alone on the show. Thankfully, you were not killed by Joe Biden's speech. But yesterday, he went from 200 million people dying from COVID to saying that 200 people have died from COVID. So that's a swing
Do you have
of
that
a
one?
million.
Do you have a video on that one too, or no?
We can find that one. We posted that on our Facebook page. So that's a wild swing. And he said 200,000 in other parts of the speech, but then he starts saying 200 men, women, mothers, daughters. Ridiculous. He's obviously not there.
All right, he has it. All right, everyone listen to this. By the way, they're throttling us, so I want to stop this really quick before you play it. Share. Hit the share button. I want to beat anything that Biden puts up, like that watch him live. I want to beat that. So share it. Tell your friends to share
it. Even when we're throttled, we still beat it.
I want to, while we're being throttled, I want to be unthrottled. So if everyone shares right now, we'll get to 1,000, and then if we get to 1,000, those people share, they'll get to 2,000, then 5,000. You know how math works, right?
Yeah.
So
and
guys,
on YouTube, make sure that you hit the thumbs up and subscribe and the bell for notifications. Let's go ahead and play Joe Biden butchering the Pledge of Allegiance.
America. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America. One nation, indivisible, under God, for real. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America. One nation, indivisible, under God, for real.
For real.
For real?
Go ahead
I
and
was
tweet
just
that
kidding.
off. We don't want to play
right.
The View. Okay. Yeah, no, I mean that's like when he called
for
God.
real?
He instead of saying endowed by their creator, he said, you know, the thing. And I guess instead of saying with liberty and justice for all, he goes with for real. Very, very interesting. So again, hit that share button, like the video, comment on YouTube. Make sure you hit the thumbs up, like button, and comment. So let's go ahead and get into this. There's a lot we have to cover today. I was going to try and cut it down. I cut it down into the most important parts, but this is a big ruling, and I want to make sure that we get through every single part of it. So let's go ahead and put up image 1. This is from Conley, Judge Conley's ruling. Image 1. We put that on the screen? Okay. I'm going to try and speed read the important parts. So he's basically saying for the reasons that follow, the court will largely reject the defendants. That's the GOP's grounds to dismiss. As for the request for preliminary relief, he's saying that he's going to grant some of them. And the reasons for that are that there's going to be 1, an unprecedented number of absentee ballots, which turned the predominance of in-person voting on its head in April. He's saying 2, but for an extension of the deadline for registering to vote electronically and for receipt of absentee ballots, tens of thousands of Wisconsin voters would have been disenfranchised in April. And he says, and 3, absent similar relief will be again in November. So he's basically saying if he does not rewrite Wisconsin's election laws, he says that there will be thousands or tens of thousands of Wisconsin voters who are disenfranchised. And I want to put up image 2 because this is the general summary of what he plans to do. And he puts this right in the beginning. So for the reasons more fully explained below, he's providing the following relief. 1, extending the deadline under Wisconsin statute section 6.281 for online and mail-in registration. He's moving it from October 14th to October 21st. Directing the WEC to include on the MyVote and WisVote websites the language provided in their March 2020 guidance, which explains that the indefinitely confined exception does not require permanent or total inability to travel outside of the residence. Basically, he's forcing the state to change their voter website to re-add the information that they were sharing at the height of the pandemic, acting as if today is April, which it isn't. 3, extending the receipt deadline for absentee ballots under Wisconsin statute section 6.876 until November 9th, but requiring that the ballots be mailed and postmarked on or before Election Day.
Well, that's
November
at least
3rd.
better. That's at least more in line with election law related to postmarking. It has to be postmarked.
Not really, because he actually says, he just like Pennsylvania, he says that if it isn't properly postmarked, you have to assume it was mailed correctly. Enjoining Wisconsin statute section 6.873A, which limits delivery of absentee ballots to mail only for domestic civilian voters, allowing online access to replacement absentee ballots or emailing replacement ballots for the period from October 22nd to October 29th. What that is saying is that instead of the state only mailing out ballots, if you ask for a ballot and it doesn't get to you, he says the state has to let you download a ballot and print it out at home. And then the last bit, put that back up one more time. He's enjoining Wisconsin statute section 7.32, which requires that each election official be an elector of the county in which the municipality is located. So just like in Pennsylvania, where they said it was constitutional, here they're saying it's not.
They are right now appealing this, correct? In both states?
Yes.
Yeah, one is being appealed to the Supreme Court, and the one in Pennsylvania was actually filed for a writ to go to the Supreme Court.
But we're down to 8 justices, 4-4 split if John Roberts joins the liberals on this, which would leave the.
I don't think he will.
I don't trust him.
I think you have to. I think you have to put it to a vote. You have to try. You have to try.
Oh, you have to try. You have to try.
Stop. You have to stop the Democrats. We can't just put our hands in the air and say, listen, we're just going to take whatever they give us. No, we have to do everything we can to preserve our republic, period, and stop. Now, here's what's going to be interesting. If they do things to take away, to try and steal the election, and if they do things to say that they're not going to accept Donald Trump as president, you think, see, we're responsible people. We don't riot in the streets. We don't do that stuff. We don't burn people's buildings. We don't do any of that stuff. But if you don't think that law-abiding people in this country that are seeing extremists try to take over our country, if you don't think that they will enter the streets in droves coming out of their house, right? I'm telling you right now, they've never seen this loony left has never seen courage. They don't even know what courage looks like. Go ahead, bring your bricks. Matter of fact, bring your guns. I'll bring 500 of them, right? Because I have lots of guns. But I'm going to tell you, sensible people, law-abiding people, we're not going to sit back and watch it happen. We're just not going to do it.
So in Wisconsin, we've seen that the GOP has been registering a ton of new voters, right? We see that in Pennsylvania, too, where the GOP is outpacing Democrat voter registration. So I want to put this up. Let's put up image 3. This is from the next part of this ruling from this Obama judge, William Conley. Accordingly, the court concludes that plaintiffs have sufficiently, and plaintiffs in this case is Democrats, plaintiffs have sufficiently demonstrated that the current electronic and mail-in registration deadline of October 14th, 2020 will substantially, and in a smaller but significant group, severely restrict the right to vote during the ongoing pandemic, particularly after considering the likely impact of increased in-person registration on the orderly, safe functioning of voting on Election Day. Moreover, by moving the deadline only 1 week to October 21st rather than the 2-week extension requested by plaintiffs, the court has amply accounted for any arguable state interest in allowing sufficient time to prepare voter records. So what he's saying is that even though state law says you must be registered to vote by October 14th, he's saying that since there's a respiratory virus, he has the power to extend it. Because if he doesn't, tens of thousands of Wisconsin residents would be disenfranchised, even though they've known about this deadline. It's been set in stone for years, right? They refuse to plan accordingly, according to him. He's changing the deadline. So even though Republicans have been surging in voter registration, this will give the Democrats an extra week to register voters. Absolutely shameful. It's set in stone, and he's changing it.
So inside of our company, we told everyone that on November 3rd, you are not to come to work. I'm giving everybody off. Go vote. Told everyone, go vote. That day, literally, we'll be working
because that's a really important day.
Josh has to work. Stephanie, who's sitting in here right now watching this stuff, she's going to have to work.
Here's the thing. So
you have to work, and I got to work. Everybody else gets to
But you're in Colorado. Colorado is a universal mail-in state.
Yeah. And since we went to that, Republicans have never won.
I know. So why does everyone get the day off?
It's fraud. Because I want everybody
Why does everyone get the day off?
All right, maybe I shouldn't.
It only takes a couple of minutes to drop it in the Dropbox.
I wonder how many people here are on the left. I gotta do a thing, because maybe I'll make them work extra hours that day.
Yeah,
just kidding. It's a joke. It's a joke.
Just kidding. Facebook, don't take us down for that.
I gave. I'm literally giving everybody the day off. I think that it's except for Josh, and Stephanie, and you.
Okay, so I want to cover this next part. We have a ton of this. I want to get through everything, and I want to show everyone every piece of what this is because it's very radical. Let's put up image 4. Democrats, DNC plaintiffs, had tried to get the judge to revoke the proof of residency requirement, the requirement under Wisconsin law that you have to prove you actually live in Wisconsin to vote. They had tried to get that removed. The judge disagreed. He said the DNC plaintiffs also seek an order enjoining the proof of residence requirement under Wisconsin statute for individuals who attest under penalty of perjury that they cannot meet the requirement after reasonable efforts. During the evidentiary hearing, the DNC plaintiffs acknowledged that they do not have any declarations establishing an actual instance of a voter being unable to meet this requirement. So they tried to get the judge to overturn the requirement that you have to prove you're a resident of Wisconsin to vote. They tried to get him to overturn it, but they didn't actually provide any evidence proving that anyone had been disenfranchised, so he didn't do it. But just to show, that's how radical the Democrats were in this lawsuit. They were going for everything. Everything that Democrats had tried to pass through their so-called HEROES Act, couldn't pass it through Congress. They're trying to push it through the courts, and conveniently only in the swing states that Donald Trump won last time around.
Well, look, they're gonna appeal this. They're gonna appeal what's happening in Pennsylvania. I think it would be difficult for the Supreme Court to deny cert on the in Pennsylvania, and frankly, as you push it up the appeals court, it's not the same as judge shopping that they can do at the first level. The second level becomes more difficult, and the third level
the appeals court
it's
randomized.
Right,
it's randomized at the appeals level.
Yeah. So unless they decide to cheat on that too, which I'm going to tell you a story. Actually, I'm not going to tell you.
Not too far. We have a ton. We have a ton.
Keep going. Keep going.
All right. All right, let's put up image 6.
And by the way,
next
we
thing
are
the
being
Democrats
throttled. Share. Even if you have to walk away from your computer and you can't actually listen to the whole thing and you're going to go download it later, just hit the share button. Like even if we're spending a couple minutes with us here and you're like, oh, I like what you're saying, I like what we're hearing, share it. Because Facebook is doing everything they can to throttle us, and we need you to actually get this out. This is the second state that they've dealt with the fact that they're legislating through the judicial branch in order to help the Democrats, the loony left.
So make sure you like, comment, share on Facebook. Give us a thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. Okay, let's put up image 6 again. The Democrats also tried to remove the signature requirement for absentee ballots, the idea that you need a witness signature attesting that you are who you say you are. And they tried to get it. They tried to get this judge to overturn it. And basically, this is him explaining their case. In essence, the DNC plaintiffs seek to enjoin this requirement for those individuals who, 1, attest under penalty of perjury, they cannot meet the requirement after reasonable efforts, 2, sign a form and provide contact information, and 3, cooperate with local election officials who may follow up. That was what the Democrats were trying to do, saying, oh, well, some people, maybe they don't have friends. Maybe they don't have anyone who knows them. How can you force them to have to prove their identity? They tried to get rid of they're trying to get rid of every single safeguard for absentee voting in this one lawsuit. And as we'll see, let's put up image 7. This is the judge. He says, here, for the same reason that the court concluded the risk of administering an affidavit, self-certifying, or other program outweigh the burden on voting rights, the court also concludes that the recommended accommodation is not reasonable over the Americans with Disabilities Act because it is not efficacious or proportional to the cost to implement it. As such, plaintiffs have not shown a likelihood of success in proving that the witness signature requirement violates the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they were trying to claim that the Americans with Disabilities Act, that law put in place that does things like require that certain buildings have a wheelchair ramp, or require that Braille or closed captioning be available on certain streams and things like and publications. They're trying to use the Americans with Disabilities Act to force Wisconsin to get rid of their witness signature requirement. Really, really shady stuff. Thankfully, this Obama judge decided not to do it.
Well, I don't think he could have got away with it. I think that he gave him as much as he possibly could without coming under suspicion, hoping that the Republicans would feel like they got enough that they wouldn't push it towards the appeal. But, I mean, at the same time that the Republicans are going to push towards appeal, my guess is the Democrats will start pushing that part of the ruling as well to appeal. So we might see just this fight go on over the next 40, 45 days.
Yeah. So just people might be saying, hey, well, man, that doesn't necessarily mean they're trying to get rid of all the safeguards to protect against absentee voting fraud. They're just trying to make sure that people who have no friends and they're disabled don't have to actually prove they are who they say they are. Well, Mr. Producer, let's jump in order. Let's go to image 16. The Democrat plaintiffs also tried to toss out the voter ID requirement. The DNC and Edwards plaintiffs both seek an order enjoining the photo ID requirement under Wisconsin statute section 687.1, although the contours of the relief request are different. The DNC plaintiffs seek to enjoin the requirement for those individuals who attest under penalty of perjury that they cannot meet those requirements after reasonable efforts, while the Edwards plaintiffs seek to enjoin the requirement for people with disabilities if they swear that they are unable to obtain the required ID. The DNC's request for relief from the photo ID requirement falters for similar reasons as plaintiffs' request for relief from the proof of residence requirement. When pressed at the hearing, the DNC plaintiffs listed 4 declarations from individuals who they represented were not able to vote in the April 2020 election because of the ID requirement. From the court's review of these 4 declarations, only one, the declaration of a woman named Shirley Powell, actually provides support for the requested relief. Powell says that she attempted to request an absentee ballot by mail, but could not do so because she did not want to leave her house to obtain the necessary copy of her photo ID. That proof falls well short of a substantial burden on her right to vote. So I just want to make sure, that was in a direct quote, anyone listening to the audio version. They tried to get rid of the state's voter ID requirement by presenting a woman's testimony saying that she couldn't vote because she didn't want to leave her house to get an ID. Not that she couldn't afford an ID, which is what other challenges to voter ID says. Not that the ID offices are closed or not close to her, which is what other challenges to voter ID claim. They actually claimed that it violates her right to vote because she doesn't want to leave her house to get an ID. That's what we're up against, folks.
But and it I want to. I want to get really angry right now and start screaming and yelling, but I'm afraid that outside the studio they'll be like, "Oh, what's going on in there?" We talk about the Democrats literally pushing on buttons and doing things to try and subvert the Constitution, to take away our ability to have rights in our community. And these are small things that we would say, it's only this little piece. The slippery slope's already happened. And this is just another example that in the 12th hour, they're trying to basically take away everything that allows us to, as a society, to elect people to represent us and our interests in the community.
And listen, I'm very sympathetic to this. I live in Texas. I moved here last year. I took my sweet time in getting an ID, aka I don't have a Texas ID yet. I still have my Colorado driver's license. But I'm a resident of Texas because I live here, and I've lived here for over a year. Texas allows you to register to vote. My big problem was that the Texas driver's license offices weren't open because of the pandemic. They weren't allowing you to walk in. They would let you sign up for appointments. And this is all the way back in like February, March, when the stuff started going down. I have an appointment, Joe, that I requested in the spring. When do you think my appointment is to get my driver's license in Texas?
After the election?
Yep, December.
Yeah.
December. I tried to get my license in the spring, and they said, sorry, the earliest we can get you in is December after the election. Luckily, Texas allows you to vote, register to vote as a resident of Texas without an ID. You have to jump through other hoops. You have to make other declarations, under penalty of prosecution. But Texas allows you to do it. So I'm sympathetic of people who've moved to states, and those states aren't letting you get a driver's license, and then those licenses are required. But in this case, that's not what the Democrats were talking about. They were talking about someone who just didn't want to leave her house. And because she didn't want to leave her house, they said that should invalidate the entire voter ID law. That's how crazy this is. And if that ruling would have gone through, it would always be that way. Because you can always find someone who doesn't want to leave their house. You can always find a Democrat voter who just would prefer to sit on the couch. Let's be honest.
You can find a lot of them that love to sit on their butts. Hey, let's stop for a second. I know you got a lot to go over, but nobody's called up in a while. So 888-441-1121. We don't tell people to call up very often. I'm going to put that out there right now. But what's important to you? I just have a question. Like, as just a person that's listening to this, what's important to you? What really, if you had to wake up in the morning and say, okay, I'm going to go to work, I'm going to come back from work, I'm going to take care of my family, I want to raise my kids, what's important to you? And the reason why I ask that is because most people in America want to be able to succeed in life. They want to be able to, have a good job, have a nice house, have a nice car, build for retirement, go on vacation. They want to have a quality of life, an enjoyment of life. How is anything that the Democrats stand for improving or in the future going to improve quality of life? I mean, I only have that question because everything that I look at that they actually represent is more based on fear, rhetoric, propaganda, hate, evil. I don't see anything that actually builds on hope. And one of the reasons why you go into Democrat-controlled environments and in other cities and why they degrade is because they don't have a platform that actually addresses or supports the community. They just don't. I mean, nothing that they do on the Democrat side supports the community. It only supports an agenda or an ideology. And frankly, it's a dangerous ideology, and it's a dangerous environment that literally is destroying everything that you should stand for, everything that's important to you, right? So what do they stand for? And I asked this question to a friend of mine who's a Democrat, and I was like, great, tell me why I should vote for Biden. I said, tell me why, because Trump he's just too brash. He's been in politics for 4 years. That's it. Never run for office anywhere, never did anything else. 4 years. Of course he's not polished. But tell me something else. Tell me what else would make Biden qualified. I said, does the teleprompter concern you? Does the idea that he can smells kids, does that concern you? Right? Does what he did in Ukraine concern you? And I walked through this stuff, and he started getting frustrated and angry. And he's like, because conservatives just want to.
We got a call. We got a call.
We got a call.
I was just going back and forth with him in the comment section. Hernando, he is an election judge in my home county of Bexar County. It's spelled Bexar, but it's pronounced Bear. We have Hernando on the line. How's it going, Hernando? No.
Hernando, you there?
Do we not?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear us?
Talking to. I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. I was just calling to let y'all know that I will be an election judge, and if there's something I should be looking for during that process, anything that should stick out or anything I should be looking for. What do you think, Max?
I actually love the fact that you're a dad and you're hanging out with your kids while you called in. That's awesome.
Oh, I'm actually on an airplane heading back to San Antonio.
Oh, okay.
Oh. Someone else's kids. So are you going to be watching in-person voting, or are you going to be observing the counting and collection of mail-in ballots?
Well, the first thing you got to get certified, and I'm going to be doing an 8-hour class to get certified first, and then they're going to place me wherever they need me. I assume it's my first time doing it, so I'm not sure where I'll be.
Well, yeah, I would definitely, as you know, Texas does have a voter ID requirement, so make sure that you check for that. Make sure that people are not being allowed to vote if they don't have the proper identification. If you end up being put in a position where you have the ability to oversee the counting of absentee ballots, then it gets really, really important, because people who don't sign the ballot, right? People who don't check the box correctly, there's tons of ways to disqualify a ballot. That's where it really becomes an actual fight. But I would probably say if you end up doing the in-person, which probably is what you'll end up doing, keep an eye out for anyone who, and you can usually tell that they start putting up a stink over not having an ID. Just make sure that whoever's running the actual check-in doesn't let them vote anyway, or doesn't take a lesser form of ID as proof of their identification.
Okay, roger that. Thank you so much, Max. Great show.
Well, thank you for the call, and have a safe flight. Wow, that was our first call from an airplane.
I don't. Yeah, that was interesting. On their way back to San Antonio, so listening to us while on the airplane. All right.
I don't think they'd taken off yet. Usually, you don't. I haven't seen a plane phone in years, so I assume that he hasn't taken off yet, and that's what was going on. Yeah. But very cool. Thank you for your call, Hernando. Let's keep going through this. I was going to read a couple of sections, but they're really long. I just want to read the actual conclusion about the absentee ballot deadline. This is the deadline that's set in stone. Wisconsin has a law that says all ballots, whether they be absentee or in person, must be submitted by the close of the election period on election day. I think it's like 8 p.m., whatever time it closes. It has to be received by the office on election day, either in person or absentee. Democrats are arguing that because Trump is sabotaging the post office, that many of those ballots won't get there in time. Now, intelligent people who want their vote to count would say, hey, it's a day before the election. Probably not a good idea for me to put this in the mail, right? Or it's the day of the election. Mail gets picked up at 3 p.m. and it's due by 8 p.m. that night. Probably isn't a good idea for me just to put this in a mailbox. What the Democrats are arguing is it disenfranchises people, that they should be allowed to put something in the mail up until the last moment on election day, and it should count. So let's go ahead and put up image 10, Mr. Producer. This is where the judge actually rules on their argument. He says, thus, on the record, the court concludes that the plaintiffs have shown a likelihood of success in demonstrating the risk of disenfranchisement of thousands of Wisconsin voters due to the election day receipt deadline outweighs any state interest during this pandemic. Accordingly, the court will grant this request, extending the receipt deadline for absentee ballots until November 9th, 2020, but requiring that the ballots be mailed and postmarked on or before Election Day, November 3rd, 2020. Now, I want to pull that up because I don't think I grabbed the part about the postmark. I want to make sure I just pull it up. What do you think of that, Joe?
Again, I want to be devil's advocate here for a minute. So as long as it's actually postmarked on the 3rd, I don't like the extension. I don't like the fact, but as long as it contains a postmark, and I know that you said that there was a part of it. I haven't read it yet, but I haven't read the conclusion yet or the order. But as long as you don't have a stack of like 500 ballots that come in that have no postmark that come in together, as long as there's some way to actually manage that, I'm not telling you I like it, but I'm telling you that at least I can live with the fact that it still stays in line with the postmark on
Well, it doesn't.
3rd.
So I just found it. So, Mr. Producer, go ahead and put up my screen.
That is why you just set me up.
Yeah.
Well, no,
I wanted to make sure I found it. This is a footnote.
Oh, there you go.
So I just read that quote, and I saw there was a footnote, and I wanted to make sure I read the footnote because I hadn't read it earlier.
21, yeah.
This is the important part. It is this court's view that local election officials should generally err towards counting otherwise legitimate absentee ballots lacking a definitive postmark if received by mail after Election Day, but no later than November 9th, as long as the ballot is signed and witnessed on or before November 3rd, 2020, unless there is some reason to believe that the ballot was actually placed in the mail after Election Day. So they say in the ruling that it has to be postmarked. But then in the footnote, he says, actually, if it doesn't have a definitive postmark, if the postmark's smudged, if they rolled it and only half of it got through, or even if there's no postmark, right? If it lacks a definitive postmark, if it is witnessed and signed on those dates before November 3rd, you're supposed to assume that it was mailed before Election Day unless otherwise you can prove otherwise. So what that means is this safeguard, the postmark, which it's in place because it is a federal felony to fabricate a postmark. That is mail fraud, right? It's to try and add an additional safeguard against absentee fraud. This judge, this Obama judge, is saying that if there's no definitive postmark, as long as the voter and his witness attest that they promised the ballot was cast before Election Day, you have to assume that they're right. You have to assume they're telling the truth. That's what we're talking about here, people. No postmark, no definitive postmark. As long as the voter wrote November 3rd, as long as they weren't stupid enough to write a date that they signed it after Election Day, you have to count it.
Yeah, so this reminds me going back to the votes that they found on the Al Franken the Al Franken election back in 2010, I think it was. Right, it was 2010.
2008, I think. 2008. It was early. I think it was Al Franken was 2008.
I'm checking right now.
Yeah, it was 2008.
2008. Okay. It stayed in the court system for an additional 3 years, right?
Yeah.
But this is the election.
He got to sit as the senator. Yeah.
But this is the election that literally he had lost, and then he opposed the results. They found another 940 or so votes, and then he won by almost the same margin in the election.
Yeah. Well, they found precisely as many votes as they needed to give him the victory.
Right.
I think he only won by a couple hundred. Zach writes in the comments, "Yay, Zach writes in the comments on Facebook, "Yay, breaking down political footnotes." You have to, Zach, because as we just showed, go ahead and put it on the screen again. Mr. Producer, put up my screen. The ruling says that ballots must be mailed and postmarked on or before Election Day, but when you get into the footnote, he says that it doesn't have to be a definitive postmark, and if there isn't a definitive postmark, assume that it's legitimate. So you go ahead and take that. That's why you have to read the footnotes. Footnotes, there's nothing sexy about it. There's nothing fun about reading footnotes, but you got to do it because they slip these things in that you never otherwise would have caught. This next part is really, really egregious. Electronic receipt of absentee ballots. Let's put up image 11. So Democrats are complaining that if you ask for a ballot, you have to, under Wisconsin law, you have to receive it by mail. Democrats are complaining because the post office is being sabotaged. So if you ask for a ballot and it doesn't get to you, you're being disenfranchised. Well, I mean, I registered to vote by mail in Texas, and I keep checking every day, and I'm not registered. They're not pulling me. I'm putting my information in. It's not returning that I'm registered. So I'm going to have to go down in person and register before the October 5th deadline, right? But they're trying to say that, oh, well, they asked for it, and it's weeks to go before the election. They haven't received it, so that means they've been disenfranchised. Well, no, it happens all the time. Things get lost in the mail. You got to just work harder. You got to keep going. If you want an absentee ballot, there's other ways to get it. The plaintiffs are arguing that no, if you don't get the ballot it's a violation of your right. Plaintiffs' renewed request for this relief is limited to those voters whose timely request of absentee ballots had their request processed and an absentee ballot mailed to them, but because of issues with the USPS for some other reasons, for some other reason, the voters did not actually receive an absentee ballot by mail in a timely fashion. Let's go ahead and put up image 12. Actually, no, let's just jump right to image 13. We'll just jump right to image 13. I don't have to read that whole part of 12. Basically, it's the Democrats saying if you don't let us get ballots by other means, you're going to disenfranchise people. This is what the judge says. Finding that plaintiffs are likely to succeed on their claim that limiting receipt of absentee ballots to mail delivery burdens voters' rights who fail to receive their absentee ballots timely, and that this burden is not outweighed by the interests of the state, the court will grant that relief. As set forth below, however, the ban on allowing online access to replacement absentee ballots or emailing replacement ballots is only lifted for the narrow period of October 22nd to October 29th. As to those voters who timely requested an absentee ballot, the request was approved and the ballot was mailed, but the voter did not receive the ballot in time to vote. Joe, for 1 week, this judge is allowing people to download ballots and print them at their home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Leave in the comment section. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. Does anyone else realize how radical this is? To email ballots. They're talking about emailing ballots to people, giving them a link. Oh, hey, go to your link and download your ballot. And then you download the ballot, you print it out, you just turn it in. Like this is what they're talking about. We're not making this up. This is straight from the ruling.
With no test of the risks that are involved. That's my problem. Is some of these judges just create rulings and frankly legislate in their environment, and they push it out there with no understanding of what the risks are. And it takes us a couple minutes to figure out what the risks are.
It takes us just a couple minutes. Let's go ahead and put that up again, Mr. Producer, because he doesn't say that there's no risks. Put that image up one more time, image 13. He says that they're likely to succeed on their claim and that limiting the receipt to just getting it in the mail burdens voters' rights and that this burden is not outweighed by the interests of the state. So what he's saying is the state's interest in preventing illegal votes from being cast does not outweigh people who want to receive a ballot in another way. That's what he's saying. So if you want to receive, let's say I want to receive my ballot by carrier pigeon, right? Does that mean the state has to do that?
Happen. Yeah, I think I can make that happen.
Yeah. So he admits, the judge admits it. So Obama judge William Conley. Let's go ahead and put that image up again, Mr. Producer. It was image B. No, let's put image B so people can see his face. Anyone who's joining late. This is the Obama judge, William Conley, Obama appointed judge, U.S. District Judge in Wisconsin. He admits that there is a legitimate state interest in preventing people from just being able to print out ballots in their own home. Like shocker. Maybe we shouldn't just let people print out ballots in their home. But he's saying no, even if that risk does exist, it does not outweigh people's request and demand to receive an absentee ballot electronically. Let me go ahead and take that off the screen now, Mr. Producer.
So for those of you listening, this is just a subversion of the Constitution. It's a subversion of law, and it's done to give Democrats the ability to steal elections. And my issue is that it doesn't matter what side you're on. People that are actually elected at every level, from the town all the way up to the federal level, they should have an interest where they represent the interests of the people in their community. And I talk to people a lot about the fact that we've just been conditioned. We were like the boiling pot of water, and that we've created this environment. We just accept things as they are, and we don't question them. And one of the things that we as businesses have to do is that we have to pay 7.5% on employees in addition to the taxes that are taken out of their paycheck. We have to pay an additional 7.5% towards their Social Security. That's one thing, right? The second thing is that we have to collect taxes for the government. Right, so businesses are forced to spend man hours, lots of man hours, and the time on every transaction.
We talk about this all the time.
I want to talk about it, Max, because frankly, we don't talk enough about the things that happen in our community that literally gets taken away from us. And now they're basically saying that they can steal elections, which means they can add to the things that they're doing to us within our community.
Well, they can do a lot of things by stealing an election.
It's basic things that we are missing as a community and what these people should actually represent. Just basic stuff, right? And they get in these positions and they make all these promises and they never ever fulfill those promises, right? And it gets even worse if you put these loony leftists or Democrats in office. It gets worse. We degrade, we actually take away the things from our community every day. And
so let's go ahead and
focus on business because we have a lot of businesses that we represent.
I know. We have a lot of business, but we got to get. We don't have that much time left in the podcast. We got to get through some other stuff on this ruling.
I'm golfing.
Let's go ahead and put up. Let's go ahead and put up image 14. Democrats also tried to get this Obama judge to sign off on universal mail-in ballots. So they tried to force this judge, or convince this judge, to force the state to send a ballot to every registered voter. I guess also it could technically be done electronically. Who knows, under the Democrats' plan. The judge denied it, though. He said, finally, with respect to absentee ballots, the Edwards plaintiffs seek an order requiring the WEC to send out absentee ballots to all registered voters, or at least to all voters who previously voted absentee. This request was not pursued at the hearing, and for good reason, since it is neither narrowly tailored to the alleged violations to voting rights caused by the pandemic. Just think about that. The pandemic can't violate your rights. That's so dumb. Sorry, that's an aside. And back to the quote, nor considers the substantial burden it would place on the WEC and local election officials who have already begun responding to actual applications for absentee ballot. The court therefore denies this request. They basically wanted to take everyone who had previously voted absentee, or everyone, and just send a ballot, even if they don't actually live there anymore. It would have been catastrophic. That's what Democrats wanted to do, send a ballot to every address in America, every registered voter in America. It would have been catastrophic. Let's get into the next one. Image 15. So Democrats were saying it's too dangerous to vote in person, but they're also arguing that you have to extend in-person voting. That doesn't make sense, people, that it's too dangerous to vote in person, but you actually have to open up more in-person voting. Plaintiffs further seek several injunctions relating to in-person voting. To begin, the Edwards plaintiffs seek to enjoin Wisconsin statute section 686(1)B, which limits in-person absentee voting to the period beginning 14 days before the election and ending the Sunday before the election. This request warrants little discussion because the Edwards plaintiffs failed to develop the record as to why a 12-day period is not sufficient to provide voters an adequate opportunity to vote early in person. Viewing the election system as a whole, a 2-week period for in-person early voting is sufficient to protect voters' constitutional rights. How is that on the judge's block, right? The states dictate how early voting goes. Not every state has early voting. Some states have more early voting than others, right? If a state wanted to say everyone who wants to vote, you have to show up in person, that state would be allowed to do it. The Constitution gives states the ability to set their own election laws. This federal judge, this Obama judge, is saying, well, they want more time, but in my opinion, 2 weeks is more than enough. In my opinion, 2 weeks is too much. When you have absentee ballots, when you have mail-in ballots, right, you can't say you need both. You can't say that we need to have more in-person voting, but it's also too dangerous to vote in person, so we also need to mail absentee ballots. But that just struck me because of it just seems very contradictory in my eyes. Let's go ahead and go to image 17. We talked about this last week, how Pennsylvania wanted to, the Republicans challenged a Pennsylvania law that said in order to observe and to monitor the polls, you have to actually live in the county that you would be monitoring. Republicans challenged it, and Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, no, it's constitutional. This judge, however, in Wisconsin, ruled that a similar statute is unconstitutional. So in Pennsylvania, you have to be a resident of the county, but in Wisconsin, you won't have to be a resident of the county. Saying that it's a violation of people's rights to say that they have to. Here's the quote. At minimum, eliminating the residence requirement would provide greater flexibility across the state to meet unanticipated last-minute demands for staffing due to COVID-19. And then let's go ahead and put up image 18. This is... This is interesting because the legislature actually challenged him on this and said, no, we set this in stone. This is the law. You have to be a resident of the county you want to observe. And the judge writes, in response, the legislature simply argues that this requirement furthers the state's interest in promoting a decentralized approach to election management. without discounting the value of this interest. If a county or municipality lacks sufficient poll workers or wishes to recruit workers from other locations within the state, including accessing National Guard members who reside outside their community, the municipality or county has already conceded its inability to maintain that interest while still conducting a meaningful election. So basically he's saying that, yeah, I understand that there's a reason to only want people living in the county to monitor that county's elections, but I'm going to open the door and let other people monitor as well. What do you think of that, Joe? Were you typing? You weren't listening?
I was typing. I was typing. I was listening, but I was typing. I was trying to do some research on whether or not this was happening in another state. So I asked to send it over to someone that actually gives some information for me.
Well, go ahead and put up the screen, Mr. Producer. This also happened in Michigan.
Yeah.
In the past week.
That's actually what the text back I just got back.
That in Michigan, as long as the ballot is postmarked by November 2nd, it has to be counted, even if it arrives after Election Day. There's no basis for this.
No.
Because, we're running a campaign today on Conservative Daily to fight back against this, because the 14th Amendment gives Congress the power to overrule these judges because they are rewriting state law, and those state laws violate the rights of voters. How can you tell me, someone who's going to vote in person, that my deadline to submit my ballot is one time, but if you want to do it absentee, you have a different deadline? Right? That's violative of my rights. That is violative of the Equal Protection Clause under the Constitution, because it gives one class of citizens extra time to deliver their ballot.
Makes them special.
It makes them special, and that is what the 14th Amendment. Go ahead and take my screen off. That's what the 14th Amendment is supposed to protect against.
So also, I just got sent an email of someone that's actually tearing down Trump signs, and so she turns around and starts screaming at the person. So someone just sent me an email over, so I'm trying to see if we can use some of the technology we have to identify her, so we can refer her for prosecution.
Let's, Mr. Producer, put up my screen one more time.
One more time.
I want to show the 14th Amendment, because the 14th Amendment was ratified to give freed slaves citizenship after the Civil War. But it does more than that. It says, yes, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That's common sense. But the other part of the 14th Amendment is the other three clauses in this Section 1 are equally important. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. That, to me, is the biggest constitutional argument against this judge's ruling. If you want to vote absentee, you are not special. You are not a special person.
So you're not special, but what they're doing is just moving the goalposts, right? So they're just moving it down further and saying, hey, look, if you vote by the 3rd and you do it in person, right, and somebody else wants to vote by the 2nd, and it gets there 4 or 5 days later, we're just moving the goalposts, right? So they're just saying that they're optioning out or creating a longer window.
Well, here's the question I have.
Which, by the way, leaves more open space, because you can't actually there isn't a lot of visibility, transparency when you stretch things out for 3, 4, 5, 6 days. I mean, it's very easy to walk in and slip things in. And I think that's
all someone would need to do when the postmark requirements are no longer in place and you have to assume something was mailed at the proper time, all someone would need to do is find a mail carrier delivering to a ballot collection facility, willing to turn around, leave their truck open. You can slip as many ballots in as you want, because you don't have to be postmarked anymore. You have to assume that as long as they're dated properly, you have to assume that they were mailed on time. This is what gets me, and this is why I believe that the equal protection argument is very, very valid. Joe, if I was on my way to the polls and my car breaks down, I'm trying to get there to vote. It breaks down, and I show up 1 minute after the polls close. Am I allowed to vote?
Are you a Democrat?
No. Unless there's a,
I might find a way for you to,
Unless there's a judge's order saying, because of the snowstorm, we're going to make sure that we keep the polls open. Unless there's a judge's order doing that, if my car breaks down and I show up at the polls late, I'm out of luck, right? I can't vote. What they're doing is they're creating special privileges to people who want to vote by mail, which if a similar thing happens, if they try to vote by mail, but the mail truck breaks down, you have to give them extra time for their vote to be delivered. I don't see any difference in my head. Someone wants to vote, they've decided a means in which to vote, and they know that there's a deadline to accomplish that. If my car breaks down, why can't I get an extra 6 days to make it to the polls?
Well, I think
right? Why can't I? No, only with absentee ballots.
Right, so they're building different lanes, right? So depending on what lane you actually enter, they're just extending those deadlines. The problem that I have is that they're saying it's because of a pandemic. Well, we've already mathematically concluded that it's not a pandemic, but that's a completely different story. So they're creating false narratives scientifically in order to create a emergency that really isn't there. So this is the same sort of opportunity and chaos that we get by creating this push towards what is equivalent of just a flu.
Yeah, I don't, anyone free to leave a comment. I don't see how it's any different. If I get stuck in traffic and I can't make it to the polls by the time they close, why am I turned away? But if the mail truck gets stuck in traffic, they get extra time to deliver those votes. How is that fair? How is that equal protection under the law? It isn't. It's creating, and notice that the Equal Protection Clause doesn't actually say it has to be on the basis of race, sex, gender. It doesn't have to be any of that. It just says equal protection. Deny any person equal protection, meaning someone else is a preferred class of citizens over that other person. They have special benefits, privileges, immunities that you don't have. I feel that it's identical. If you're going to extend that, you have to extend in-person voting, but you're not allowed to, because in-person voting, the election day is set in the Constitution. So they're trying to work around this by saying that election day is set, but we're going to give you extra time for some people. And yeah, we know that those people overwhelmingly are Democrats. We're going to give them extra time. But if you're Republican, deadline's hard and set. I mean, this is what's happening, people. We didn't put it in the title because we didn't want Facebook to throttle us even more. And we actually had some decent viewership. It should have been much higher. Not your guys' fault. It's Facebook's fault. I didn't put that this is an attempt to steal the election in the title, but that's what this is. They've identified, they tried to push this through legislation. They ran out of time. Republicans blocked them. Now they're going state by state in the states that Donald Trump won by slim margins and getting them to throw out the very laws in place to protect against fraudulent absentee ballots, and giving Democrats, who are overwhelmingly make up the majority of people who vote by mail, giving them extra time to get their ballot delivered, where Republicans have less time. It just seems so violative.
So why don't we do this? I mean, this is something we could actually talk about. Why not legislate to create a law where if you commit voter fraud, you spend 20 years in prison?
Yeah.
It's 20 years. Yeah, if you actually try to subvert the Constitution and to steal an election, you get 20 years in prison. You have to spend 20 years in prison for trying to affect an election. 20 years. Mandatory. I'd go for that. And you'd say, well, that's unreasonable. No, it's not. You tried to steal an election. You tried to steal our country. You tried to take away our ability as a country to self-govern and to elect our leadership. You want to do that? You got to get out. You got to spend 20 years breaking rock. And they should bring that back too, breaking rock. I mean, maybe not really rock, but they should make every person that goes to prison actually work.
You mean like Rambo 2?
Yeah, why not?
Rambo 2, he's sitting in the rock yard breaking rocks. Rambo, we need your help. We got POWs. I would support that. Any final words as we wrap up the podcast, Joe?
Yeah, so just to kind of divert a little bit, if you see someone that is trying to steal signs, right, you really should have enough courage to stand up to them, right? If you see someone trying to intimidate someone else, you really should stand up for that person being intimidated. You see someone out there that tries to knock somebody's hat off or take somebody's hat or intimidate or bully someone, I'm going to give you permission here. I mean, obviously use your own judgment, but you have permission to stand up for the people around you. So do that. We're going to continue to push hard to make sure that we bring as much of this to light as possible. And we just pray that, if you're listening, that you get out and vote. You have to vote. But more importantly, you have to have the courage to stand up and have the conversation in your community.
And you mentioned the signs. My sign is still out on my yard. I installed a video camera watching it 24/7, and miraculously, it hasn't been stolen again. So next episode, I'll play on the video streams. I'll play some video so you can see what I did with that, because that was something I promised I would do.
There's a guy in New York that put razor blades on it. Did you hear about that?
we had a whole episode
literally cut up the guy's hands. He's walking away holding his hand because he tried to grab it, and he embedded little itty bitty razor blades all the way along the sign. I was like,
I didn't do that because I have kids in the neighborhood and I don't want them to get. But I did spend a couple hours looking for poison ivy to see if anyone in my neighborhood had poison ivy I could smear on it. Couldn't find any. Well, that's going to be it for this edition of the podcast. If you like the podcast and you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the audio version. Even if you watch us live on the videos, doing that will help you listen. If you're not at your computer, out and about, you can listen as you go about your day. There's all links in the description. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Store, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Podbean. If you're an Apple user and you want to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, please also leave us a review. We're getting more and more good reviews. It's helping us go up in the rankings. So please do that. Leave us a good review if you can. It'll help us get more listeners to the podcast. We're also on Parler. Follow us at Conservative Daily. We'd be happy to follow you back. There's a link in the description to join our email newsletter. If we do get taken out by Facebook, that's how we're going to communicate how the show is going to keep going. So make sure you sign up for that. And again, if you haven't already, like and follow our Facebook page. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. I think I hit everything. So that's going to be it for this edition of the podcast. Again, my name is Max McGuire.
This is Joe Otto. I'm going to go hit.
And remember that
I'm going to go hit 72 today in golf.
You're going to hit into the sand trap, but that's neither here nor there.
Sorry, go ahead.
My name is Max McGuire. That's Joe Otto. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We'll be back again tomorrow. And remember that the fight to take back our country clearly isn't over, but the only way we win is if we all stand and fight together.